You who don't know me, I'm Joanne and I work in the support and information team with Louise, who's currently in France at the moment, so I'm going solo, so hopefully it'll all be okay. Just a few housekeeping points before we start. I've got you all on mute if that's okay, just because it cuts down on background noise. You can unmute yourself at the end and ask Mark questions if you'd like to. Also, I'm recording this webinar because we'll upload it to our YouTube channel so people can watch it if they weren't able to make it today. So today's speaker is Mark Reed, and he is a specialist radiographer and key worker at the Proton Beam Therapy Centre at the Christie. And today Mark's going to talk to us about what the Christie offers as part of its proton beam service. I think he's going to touch on some eligibility criteria, and also how proton beam therapy differs to traditional radiotherapy and what that means for bone cancer patients. So I'll hand over to you, Mark, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. Can you all hear me? Great. So, yeah, like I said, my name's Mark Reed. I'm a specialist radiographer from the Christie Hospital up in Manchester. I work in the Proton Beam Therapy Centre and I work with sarcoma and head and neck patients. I mainly work with the adults and the teenage and young adult patients. So like Louise said, I'll go through what proton beam therapy is, how it differs from regular radiotherapy, and I'll call that conventional radiotherapy. And then I'll go through what the Christie Hospital offers our patients when they come to protons, and I'll touch on eligibility criteria, and I'll tailor that mainly specifically towards patients with bone cancer. Okay. So, let me see. Can you all see my screen? So. We say, what is proton beam therapy? Well, proton beam therapy, or protons are particles of an atom. They're the positive charged particles, and they make up the nucleus of an atom. And what proton beam therapy is just another way of delivering radiotherapy. It is different from X-ray radiotherapy, which is conventional radiotherapy. In my next slide, I'll show you how they differ. So, this is the essential difference between proton beam therapy and X-ray radiotherapy, where there's very little or no exit dose from proton beam therapy. So as you see on the slide with the X-rays, there's a sort of, we treat the cancer, we fire the proton beam or the X-rays at the cancer, but there's always a little bit of what we call exit dose. So some of the normal tissue around the cancer will get some dose. With protons, we can stop that dose almost directly after we've delivered our dose to the cancer. And it's almost sort of a complete cut-off of dose there. This is just an example of a brain tumor patient, which we use a lot in our education materials, which just demonstrates the difference between an X-ray plan and a proton beam therapy radiotherapy plan. So here with the proton beam therapy plan, we have a tumor in red, and we can mold the dose around that tumor really well, where there's very little dose into the other side of the brain. While in this X-ray treatment, while we get a very good coverage of the tumor itself, we do get some very low dose out into the other parts of the brain and other parts of the body. Now, why is that important? So it's important for two reasons, which I'll go through now. Also, this is another example, a really good example of where protons are beneficial over conventional radiotherapy. So here we're treating, this is a young lad we're treating his entire spine. So in red is where we want to treat, and in blue, and the other colors are just different colors of different levels of radiation. Well, here with protons, we can stop the dose almost immediately after where we want to stop it. On his other X-ray plan, we get a lot of low dose in his body elsewhere. And the same, this is another part of the same plan where we can spare his ears getting some dose here. And like I said, why is that important? Well, it's important for two main reasons. So the property of protons allows us to stop that dose where we want to stop it, directly after the tumour. Now, what that means is it can reduce the side effects, and mainly it reduces the probability of a secondary malignancy. Now, photons can do the same thing, but again, you get that low dose elsewhere away from the tumour. Now, that's really important in young people, in young children and young teenagers and young adults, where they're going to live a very long time post their treatment. And can everyone see this? Everyone hear me? Where they could live a very long time after their treatment. So we want to reduce the dose elsewhere in the body and so that we reduce that chance of having a secondary malignancy later in life. And it's also important where we need to increase the dose to the tumours. And that's really, really important in bone cancers, because a lot of bone cancers, such as chordomas and chondrosarcomas, are quite radio resistant. So we need to give higher doses of radiation than we can with normal radiotherapy. And we do that by increasing the dose to the tumour. It means we can stop it, and we can stop that toxicity further away from the tumour. And that's a really motivating factor when we treat adults with proton beam therapy. Oh, I've gone too far, sorry. So I'll talk more about the indications now for proton beam therapy. So these are the bone cancer indications currently funded by the NHS. So in teenagers and pediatric patients, Ewing sarcoma, chordoma, and chondrosarcoma are all on the indication list, as well as specific cases of osteosarcoma. In adults, it slightly differs. So any spinal bone sarcoma, any paranasal or nasal cavity tumours that are in the bone sarcoma category, and any base of skull chordomas or chondrosarcomas. What we don't treat on the indication list are patients that need radiotherapy in their arms or their legs, and that's just because there's no benefit for proton beam therapy when you have we're treating tumours in the arms, legs, or sort of hands and feet. And that's because we can do this really well with conventional X-ray therapy, and we can spare all the critical structures in those areas with conventional radiotherapy. I've included a link in this presentation, which is just here, and that goes through in far more detail than I could possibly go in about the list of indications for proton beam therapy that are included, that aren't included, and that gives the reasons why they are and aren't included. And that's not just specific to bone cancer, that's specific to all types of cancer diagnosed in the UK. So the current proton beam therapy programme. Since 2008, we've had a proton beam therapy plan in the United Kingdom funded by the NHS, but we were sending patients abroad. We were sending them to the US, Germany, and Switzerland. It was a very good service, but obviously it wasn't ideal. So they planned to open 2 proton beam therapy centres in the UK in both the Christie and UCLH. Christie was the first to be opened, and it opened for treatment in December 2018, and we've been treating patients ever since. We still send patients abroad, so we don't take all the patients at the Christie. We still send patients abroad to Jacksonville, Essen, and Switzerland. UCLH is due to open in 2021, but there's obviously been delays with building that facility. So I'll just mention about COVID because it's the sort of hot topic at the moment. We still treated patients all the way through during the COVID situation. The only issues were sending patients abroad. Obviously, we couldn't do that when we were in full lockdown. So we treated all the patients at the Christie that needed proton therapy. In the future, we're still looking to send patients abroad. So this is the idea of the national service. So there would be 2 centres, one at the Christie, one at UCLH. And at full ramp up, when both centres are fully opened, we should be able to treat roughly about 1,500 patients a year between the 2 centres. It roughly works out about 750 between the 2 centres. Each centre is the exact same machine, exact same make with the exact same sort of hardware. It'll be 3 treatment machines on each site. And we hope that after 2 years of each site being open, they should be at full ramp up. UCLH will probably open 2021, and until UCLH are fully ramped up, the overseas program will still continue, and patients will be still sent abroad for proton beam therapy if needed. And there's on that link there's sort of the criteria of how that decision making is made and how the commission has made that decision about who has protons in the UK and who has protons elsewhere. So this is just an idea of the ramp up phase. So we should be taking we're roughly here at the moment where we are the only centre in the UK taking the NHS patients. Some patients still go abroad. UCLH looks to be up and running. We hope to be here in 2021. And then in 2022, we hope to be having most of the patients, or most, if not all of the patients in the UK travelling to have their protons within the United Kingdom. So this is just a summary from 2015 to 2019. So the period of time where we started taking patients, about bone cancer patients in the adult population, so that's 16 plus, that had proton beam therapy on the NHS. So it was roughly about 117. With the adults, it was mainly looking at a lot of most of the chordoma cases in the UK, and then there was the occasional sort of osteosarcoma of the spine, and then Ewing sarcoma in select cases for adults. We deliver it with proton beam therapy, and in the teenage population, you see there's slightly more Ewing sarcoma patients than any other bone cancer indications, and that's just because of the nature of the disease, and it's more prevalent in the younger population. So I'll explain the process that doctors have to go through to refer patients for proton beam therapy. So routinely, a patient is discussed at their local sarcoma MDT, and it's identified there that they're a good candidate for proton beam therapy. They then should be seen by a clinical oncologist, which is a doctor that specialises in radiation oncology and delivers radiotherapy locally. And they will make their referral through the National Proton Beam Referral Panel. And on that panel, the panel's looked at by a team of expert doctors. They will make a decision as to whether or not proton beam therapy is indicated and is a good treatment for them. They look at the scans, basically scans, the social situation, and a variety of things, and they make a decision based on them. Then the NHS England will assign a treatment centre, and again, currently that's us in the Christie or Essen, but it has been the USA or PSI, which is a facility in Switzerland. And then After that, we will discuss them at the local MDT, which is an MDT that we have in the local proton center, where we decide whether or not proton beam therapy is actually sort of achievable for that patient. Because sometimes proton beam therapy is indicated, but there may be other issues around the technicalities of proton beam therapy, which may make it very difficult, if not impossible, for us to deliver any different treatment to what you could get locally. And then the patient would be accepted formally, and we would ask them to travel up to Manchester to have their proton for their planning stage. So this is the pathway of how that happens and then what happens next. So this is a summary of what I've just told you, with the added on bit of what we do at the Christie. So we would discuss them at our local MDT, and then they'd be allocated a key worker after that MDT. That key worker will, it may be me, or it may be one of my other colleagues. We would then contact the patient and make arrangements for them to travel to the Christie for a planning week, where we'd meet the doctor and get some scans done. And this is generally what that pathway looks like. So we would see the patient, I'd meet them, my colleagues would meet them, the doctors would meet the patient, we'd get everything signed, and then we'd start making some what we call immobilisation to keep the patient in the correct position for their treatment. We would then do some scans to make sure we can plan the treatment really accurately. Those scans are a CT scan or an MRI scan, but at the Christie we have the facilities to do any other scans that we may need. We would then send the patient back to their local centre, where they could either carry on with their chemotherapy if they're on chemotherapy, or just back to their treatment centre, and we would do the proton therapy planning then. It takes a long time to plan the therapy, roughly 2 to 3 weeks, and that's just because it's quite complex. That's done by the doctors and the physics team here at the Christie. And roughly 3 weeks after that happens, we would invite the patient back to the Christie for proton beam to start their treatment. That treatment can vary from anything to 4 to 7, and sometimes even 8 or 9 weeks long, depending on the type of tumour or the type of treatment the patients are having. Typically with bone cancer, we treat at that longer end, so it's roughly 6 to 8 to 9 weeks the patients are with us in Manchester. After we finish proton therapy, we would send the patient back to their referring centre, where their long-term follow-up would continue with their local centre. So in that first week, we would do all the scanning, like I said. Patients below the age of 16 would have support through the place specialists, the anaesthetic team, if the patient needs a general anaesthetic for treatment. And we have support from Royal Manchester Children's Hospital for any patients that might need chemotherapy and their children. That would take place at the Manchester Children's Hospital. Adult patients that need chemotherapy while they're having treatment, they could have that at the Christie, and we fully support that. And it's usually matched to what they've had in their local treatment centre. This is an example of some of the immobilisation. This is a specific one for a bone cancer patient. So this is an adult patient who was having her lower spine treated. So we make what we call a vac bag, which is short for vacuum bag. And essentially what that is, it starts us off life as like a bean bag. We will place the patient in it, mold the bag to the patient, and then suck all the air out of it so it matches to the patient's contours. We'd ask that they lie on their front with their arms above their head, so we can get the machine into the right place and deliver the treatment. It's usually well tolerated. It can become a bit of a challenge, but patients have to maintain this position for proton beam therapy. This is another example of a patient where we're treating the upper spine. So when we treat the upper spine, it's better for us if we lie the patient on their back. We create what we call a thermoplastic mask, which is this yellow mask here that molds to the patient's shoulders and head, neck. It keeps it in a really secure position. The way we do that is it starts off life as a sort of a flat piece of plastic. We pop it in a little sort of pizza oven sort of heating device. It heats it up so the plastic itself becomes meshable and pliable, and then we pop it over the patient's head and neck so it molds their head and neck as it cools down. We ask that they just lie as still as possible for this. They can have relaxation sort of music in the background, podcasts. They can have we can have support from, we have a calms therapist, sort of a complementary therapist who can help patients through this, because it can feel quite claustrophobic and it can be quite difficult, and we appreciate that. But it is necessary for us to deliver the treatment. It's usually well tolerated by patients, and patients can swallow in while they're in this mask, and they can also breathe. It does look quite intimidating, but it is usually well tolerated, and it can you can breathe and swallow and cough if you need to in the mask. So while the patients are up here with us, we do provide them with accommodation. So patients are allowed accommodation if they fall into one of these outside the area that I've listed here. So it's basically outside the Greater Manchester and surrounding areas where we'd offer them accommodation. We'd encourage patients to take that up. NHS England pays for that accommodation. It's just because it can be very difficult travelling long distances to get to protons each day while they're having treatment. We'd ask that they attend for treatment every single day, but the weekends, and we can appreciate that long distance travel may become difficult. So the accommodation is offered to anyone outside of these boundaries. The accommodation is at a place called Stay City, and it's what we call an apart hotel in Manchester Centre. It's right by Piccadilly Station, so it's got good transport links. This is an example of what they offer there. So it's a full apartment in the city centre. For adults, they get a 1-bedroom apartment, which can sleep up to 4 people in, but that would be quite tight. For teenagers, young adults and children, they're offered sort of a 2-bedroom apartment in the city centre, which can sleep up to 6. So it's got everything you need to live basically in it. So it's got telly, Wi-Fi, oven, microwave, kettle, toaster. It's got a fridge, freezer, and it's quite close to the local amenities and shops, so you can quite easily get the things that you need. So this is a summary of what they offer there. So they offer, there's an on-site cafe with a 15% discount. We have a communal space there, although it hasn't been used during COVID. The same with the gym. We do appreciate that not everyone comes with different circumstances, so they do offer cots and baby facilities if needed. They do have on-site car parking, and they can provide you a breakfast. So we book it twice for each patient. So we book it once for the assessment visit, and we'll book the same sort of arrangement for their treatment visit. We do have accessible rooms for patients that need access for wheelchairs and struggle getting in and out of showers and baths and things like that. Any additional nights that patients want to stay are made at the patient's expense, but you have to let the team at Stay City know about that. and Stay City are really have been really great with us while we've worked with them. They're very accommodating and very helpful in whatever the patients need. They've also been a great help with setting up the service with our patients. We do encourage our patients not to travel home at the weekends, and that's just because currently there are travel restrictions for COVID patients, and more importantly, patients can become ill for whatever reason over the weekends. In, say, they were coming from Birmingham, they would be admitted to their local hospital in Birmingham. It would be very difficult for the team at the Christie to get the patients back to Manchester to continue with their therapy. So that's why we just encourage the patients not to travel home during their treatment and to stay in Manchester over the weekends. Travel to and from Stay City to the Christie is done via a shuttle bus. It's a shuttle bus that we run regularly all through the day, so patients can hop on and hop off when their appointment times and closest to their appointment times. It runs from Manchester Piccadilly, which is the Stay City accommodation, to MFT, which is the Central Manchester hospital where Manchester Children's is, and then on to the Christie, which is just a little bit further up the road. We encourage all our patients to use that, and I think it works fairly well. Travel to the accommodation from, say, your home is not funded by the NHS, unfortunately. The Christie is not responsible for getting the patients to and from Manchester from their local trusts. For any financial support patients need for their transport or any transport issues, they're probably best contacting their local GP or their referring trust. Patients were encouraged to use public transport, but that was pre-COVID. So we appreciate that patients may have to drive now for shielding reasons. Any sort of travel booked via the local team, so hospital transfers or hospital has to be sorted out at the end of the referring centre. But thanks to the Bone Cancer Research Trust, they've kindly made they've offered a bone cancer research charity grant for patients coming to the Manchester or UCLH when it opens. And it's a one-off grant for patients diagnosed with primary bone cancer that have been allocated to the Christie or UCLH to help with the cost of long-distance travel. If patients need that, they should ask their key worker at the Proton Therapy Centre, and we can just organise that on the day. And it's proven very, very popular with our patients so far, because we appreciate that it's a long way to come, and any financial help is appreciated at such times. So the usual boundaries apply for hospital transport, and the usual eligibility criteria apply, but that eligibility criteria will vary from trust to trust, and it's best that if patients need that, they should check with their local GP or local trusts. And we are fairly flexible with how with patients coming on hospital transport. So where are we now in the current situation at the Christie with delivering proton beam therapy? So we're currently working towards our full ramp up. COVID did slow us down a little bit, but we're currently working towards that full ramp up. Some patients are still being sent abroad, and that's for a variety of reasons. All our pathways are currently open. So we are currently open for pediatric patients, sarcoma patients, head and neck patients, and patients with primary CNS cancer that meet the indications. We've had patients come from all over the UK for for treatment, as far away as Cornwall and as far away as Scotland and Northern Ireland. And our age range so far at the Christie for proton therapy, we've had patients as young as 1 year old, but we've had patients as old as 81, I think, is our oldest patient treated with proton beam. So I'll go through what's at the Christie and what we offer as part of our service. So this is what the Proton Beam Therapy Centre looks like. It's a 4-storey building on the Christie site. It's quite a big building. When you come to the Christie, you can't really miss it because it's got proton beam therapy written all over the top of it. This is what the machine looks like itself. So the machine is a 365 variant ProBeam proton therapy machine. It moves around the patients 360 degrees. They just lie on this 6-degree freedom of movement couch. We have cone beam CT cone beam CT facilities, and we have X-ray facilities to help us position the patients correctly. Each treatment takes roughly about 45 minutes to an hour, and that's just because we need to make sure the patients are in the right position each time. We have waiting areas which have very sort of been designed with input from patients abroad. It's very light and airy. It's quite a big space. There's plenty of room for patients. This wall here is all glass, so when the sun shines through it, it's quite nice and airy. It doesn't feel like a sort of a normal waiting room feel. This is the anaesthetic and children's area. So they've decorated it with these sort of a jungle theme and sort of an underwater theme for patients. So these are the areas where patients go for their general anaesthetics before their treatment. So this is an area where a patient will wake up after they've had treatment, and they've got all this decoration on the wall. So we try and make it feel a lot less like a hospital in that area, and try and tailor it more to our paediatric patients. We have 3 scanners on site. We have a MRI scanner, which is seen here when they can put different themes on it. So this is like a green theme. And we have a CT scanner to help with our planning for proton therapy. And we also have what we call the little kitten scanner, which is a baby cat scanner supplied by Philips that can just make it easier for children to just sort of relate to what they're going to go through during their treatment. And they can put these little, well, this is the elephant. They can put the elephant through the scanner, and there's a big screen just to the right of the that scanner that you see. It tells a story of why the elephant's had a scan and what's going to happen to it. And these are more of the clinic areas. So this is the paediatric clinic area. They've had lots of toys donated and toys donated by various charities all over the Greater Manchester area. It's tailored towards paediatrics, this area, and it's also closed off from the other area. So it's not, we don't have paediatric and adult patients mixing. It just makes it a little bit of a more nice environment for the paediatric patients and makes it a bit easier for them when they come to the treatment. So the support staff that we have in the Christie, so we have a large support staff of patients where we look after them during their treatment. So we have play specialists who work with the under 16s to get them through treatment so that they understand why they should be, how they sit still, lay still, and why they're having their treatment. We have anaesthetic support who look after the patients when they're under GAs, and that that team is a large team with anaesthetists and ODPs and nurses that look after the paediatric patients when they're going for proton beam therapy. We have a youth support coordinator who's funded by the Teenage Cancer Trust, who works with 13 to 24-year-olds during their time at the Proton Centre. She puts on lots of different activities to keep patients entertained, supports them through their treatment socially and psychologically, and does lots of peer-to-peer and group work with them. We have a click sergeant social worker who works with the younger patients up to the age of 24. She will sort of provide social work support for any patients and families that are coming to the Proton Centre. We have an adult physio who will work with our adults, so that's 16 plus, patients who need rehab or prehab needs during their time at the Proton Centre, so they can continue any rehab, or she can prepare them for any prehab that they need during their proton therapy. We have an adult occupational therapist who will help the same. She deals a lot with anxiety management, and she will make assessments where needed for patients that need reasonable adjustments at Stay City. We can provide equipment that patients need to continue living an independent life. We have an adult dietitian who works a lot with our head and neck patients and other patients where they might struggle to maintain their oral intake. She will do reviews, nutritional advice, supplementary advice. She'll provide supplementary shakes, and she does management of any feeding tubes that patients have as well. We have an adult speech and language therapist who will work with patients that need any help with speech and language therapy, so swallowing difficulties, swallowing assessments. She can organise video swallows for patients. For patients that struggle with adjusting to coming to the Proton Therapy Centre, we have a complementary therapist who will do anxiety management and will do a lot of work with the patients on managing their anxieties and managing any issues that they may have, any worries that they have during their treatment. And each patient that comes to the Proton Therapy Centre will be assigned a key worker, which will be their first point of contact during their time. We're a team of specialist radiographers and specialist nurses who work with the patients. They have our number, so if they have any queries, they can ring us up. We also do side effect management with the patients, any onward referrals, and we are sort of a link between the Christie and any referring centres that refer patients into our team. So I've got the doctors to prepare some slides on examples of bone cancers that we've treated at the Christie, and examples of plans and how proton beam therapy relates to bone cancer treatment. So I've got a few case discussions here which I'll go through. So this was a patient who had a sort of upper neck chordoma. So you can see here where this is the tumour sort of bulging into the cord, and this is it here as well on a different slice. So this was a pre-operative scan of the patient, and then this is what our plan looked like after the patient went for an operation. They had 2 operations. The first operation was to remove the tumour and put some stabilisation in their neck. And I think the second operation was to replace that stabilisation with some carbon fibre plates so that we could deliver the proton beam therapy a little bit easier. So one thing about proton beam therapy and radiotherapy in general is that metal is not always great for radiotherapy. It's good for reconstructing, but it can be difficult to plan radiotherapy around metal work. So sometimes we do ask patients or referring trusts, if possible, to replace those metal implants with carbon fibre, because carbon fibre is a lot more forgiving to radiotherapy. Now, this was the proton beam therapy plan that we delivered. you can see that we covered the entire area of the tumour really well with protons. We managed to get very little dose elsewhere in the body, and we managed to dose escalate this patient up to a better therapeutic dose. This was a plan that we did as well, just on the patient. We didn't deliver this plan, but it was made just to compare the two. This was a photon beam therapy plan with regular X-ray therapy. While we got good coverage of the tumour, there was definitely more dose elsewhere in the body, so out the front of this patient's mouth and elsewhere in the body. While this is really tight and quite what we call conformal, this is quite that there's quite a lot of exit dose. That's what we'd expect, and this is why chondrosarcomas and chordomas are both on the indication list, because we get better plans with proton therapy. This was a second case. This is another case. This was a preoperative chordoma of a patient with in their spine. So you can see the orange outline here is where the tumor is in this patient's spine. So this was its preoperative imaging. I believe this patient had an operation to remove the tumor, and stabilization popped in again. So this is what the post-operative imaging. I think this is our planning imaging for our therapy. So the green area is where we wanted to treat, and the yellow area here is where the tumor was. So what we do is we covered the operative bed and most of the metalwork in the patient's spine, and we had this was also replaced with sort of carbon fiber stabilization, so we could deliver proton beam therapy a little easier. Thank you. Is there any questions?
Right, well that was great, Mark. Thanks ever so much. And also thank you for calling me Louise, because
sorry.
No, it's fine. Being mistaken for a 29-year-old has made my day. So thank you very much for that. I don't know whether anybody else has got any questions, but I certainly have a few. You mentioned that the patients could be having the chemotherapy and the radiotherapy, the proton beam therapy, sorry, at the same time. You know, how well is that tolerated? Because that's a lot for a body to be taking on, isn't it?
So there are sort of a few specific indications that have that. I think the main bone cancer one that usually has that is the Ewing sarcoma patients, and they have their what we call VDCIE chemotherapy, and that runs alongside the proton beam therapy. It's usually really well tolerated. We do have to admit patients, but we expect that. And we do have facilities to admit patients on site at the Christie, and we do have facilities to admit patients at Manchester Royal Children's Hospital. We have a specific teenage young adult ward at the Christie for teenagers, and we do have adult wards at the Christie to admit patients too. We try not to do that, so we try and deliver as much of the treatment as an outpatient as possible. We do have what we call an ambulatory care delivery of the chemotherapy for our teenagers and young adults. So anyone up to the age of 24, an outpatient where they have their chemotherapy delivered on site at the Christie, but all the supportive medicine is delivered through a little pump which they can take back to Stay City.
Okay.
And it's tolerated really well.
Okay, that's good. Also, when Louise and I came to visit you at the Proton Beam Therapy Centre, I think you told us about like degradation of the skin caused by... Yeah, so can you just talk a bit more about that, about how much better proton therapy is?
So I can touch on the side effects of proton therapy. So proton beam therapy, there are side effects to it. It's still radiotherapy, so we still expect many of the same acute side effects. One of the side effects proton therapy has is that it loses its skin sparing ability compared to normal radiotherapy. So we do see some quite high grade skin reactions. So what happens is typically patients' skin will become a little bit red, roughly about halfway through the treatment. It's like quite a bad sunburn. This will continue, and sometimes towards the end of the treatment, patients find their skin breaks down and it becomes quite flaky, very dry, sticky to touch. It's very manageable. It can be quite painful, but we can manage that with pain medication, and we have a skincare regime which is in line with the Society of Radiographers guidance. And it's usually managed quite well. That skin reaction does subside roughly 2 to 3 to 4 weeks after the treatment, but we will continue to provide patients with dressings and different creams that they need during their treatment.
Okay. And I've just got one final question, and then I'll let somebody else have a turn. You said that the UCLH Centre should be opening in 2021.
Yeah.
Surely COVID's going to have impacted that. Is that
they've managed to keep working all the way through COVID, I believe. So I think it's still on course to open.
Oh. Hi, I'm really sorry. I'm Carly. I'm a physio at UCLH.
Hi, Carly.
So yeah, we've heard that the new centre should be open late November. That will be the new hospital. I'm not sure when they're going to actually start patients on proton beam. But yeah, it looks really nice there. They've been working through COVID and they're nearly done. So yeah, hopefully by the end of November, we'll all be in there.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's really good news. Thanks, Carly. Does anybody else have any more questions for Mark? We all okay? No? Okay, well, I just want to say a big thank you to Mark. That was really great. Thanks so much for coming and taking the time to give us this webinar. Our next webinar will be on the 27th of August at 1 p.m. And it's with Charlene Young, who is talking about her experiences of being an osteosarcoma patient and also a young Black woman, and her work with the Black Women Rising movement as well. So if you can join us for that, that'd be fantastic. So hopefully see you there. Bye, everybody.
Bye.